We live in a world today where manufacturing and consumerism are the dominant reality and the dominant metaphor of understanding life. From an early age, we absorb the belief that we humans make everything of value. Listen to how we use the word in our everyday speech. We make time, we make friends, we make meaning, we make money, we make a living. Even a child in our culture will typically not ask, for instance, how do you grow a baby, but how do you make a baby? In this way of seeing life based on manufacturing and consumerism, we reduce the world to mere raw material that lacks all value until we impose our designs and labor on it. How do you know if you're buying a good product? Most of the time it comes covered in plastic, right? Usually a cardboard box these days. We humans now produce 380 million tons of plastic each year, with more made in the last decade than the entire last century. We're not going in the right direction here. A recent report from the OECD found that the amount of plastic waste produced globally is on track to almost triple by 2060, with most of it essentially single-use items, half ending up in the landfills and less than a fifth recycled. Suffice to say, while modern life certainly produces some great creature comforts, including air conditioning, which we have a little bit of in here, thankfully, antibiotics, we have access to an incredible amount of wonderful gadgets and stuff and food from around the world. But when we face up to it, our modern consumer way of life is destroying the planet and ourselves in the process. As we pollute the planet, we inevitably end up polluting ourselves. We're breathing in and ingesting plastics, chemicals, and other waste from our manufacturing and consumer-driven economy. Logically, this is obvious and inevitable as we grow from the very earth that we're polluting, right? Yet it's not in industry's interest to pay much attention to that, and consumers, we don't really want to know about it either, right? Now, I'd like to take you back to 1967. We were just starting to produce plastic waste at that time compared to what we're producing now, at least. That year, a little-known historian of medieval science and technology published a paper called "The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis." The article by Lynn White went on to become a classic, widely cited and referenced even to this day. In the paper, he argued that our current environmental crisis is the result not just of our technological ability to impact and degrade the environment, it is first and foremost the product of our Western worldview. What people do about their ecology depends on what they think about themselves in relation to things around them. And so, until we clarify and reorient our relationship with the world around us, we will not be able to adequately address our environmental crisis. Is this true? I think most people, including myself, have looked toward policy and technology for the solutions to our environmental disaster without thinking too much about whether our larger worldview might need to change as well. As if anticipating this trend, White wrote, "We shall continue to have a worsening ecological crisis until we reject the Western axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve humans." I suspect in this space here, when we hear this sentence, we know it's not true that nature exists only to serve us humans. Yet the message we take in from our culture, from advertisements, and unintentionally from each other is that what we manufacture and what we buy, including our technologies, are primary, essential even to fulfilling our hopes and dreams, to being attractive, to finding love. As you know, if the solution to our environmental destruction was as simple as a technological fix, we would be much further along to live sustainably on this planet, right? I think sometimes in very unassuming ways, we humans absorb ideas of what to value from our culture. And in our modern world, we have been taught to give ultimate value, really, to our manufacturing and consumer way of life, at least through our actions, if not necessarily through our words. In a wonderful little book called Let Your Life Speak, the Quaker educator and activist Parker Palmer talks about the ways that our culture brought him along for this ride, too. Just like so many of us, he thought he needed to achieve in certain ways that are culturally prescribed. This led him into a depression. He felt like a fake, working towards goals that were not his in his heart of hearts. This is what happens when we unintentionally take in the false gods of modern culture. We start to feel empty when we place the goals of ego above those goals that will give true meaning and value and purpose to our lives. So there's a wonderful and humorous moment in the book where he tells of when he was asked if he would like to become president of Pendle Hill, which is, at least in the Quaker world, a well-known Quaker conference center in Pennsylvania. To help him decide if he'd like to do this, he asked half a dozen of his trusted friends to help him discern in a process called a clearness committee by the Quakers. So the group gathered to ask him open and honest questions about his vision and dreams for Pendle Hill, and ultimately about why he felt called to this job. Parker Palmer was doing just fine with the questions until someone asked him, "Palmer, what would you like most about being president?" The simplicity of the question, he writes, loosened him from his head and lowered him into his heart so that he genuinely thought about it for a good deal of time. And then he surprised everyone by giving answers about what he would not like about it. Well, I would not like having to give up my writing and my teaching. I would not like the politics of the presidency, never knowing who your real friends are. I would not like having to glad hand people I do not respect simply because they have money. The questioner interrupted him to repeat the question. May I remind you, I asked what you would most like about the presidency. Yes, I'm working my way towards an answer, he responded. Then he resumed his honest litany. I would not like having to give up my summer vacations. I would not like, you get the point. Once again, the questioner called him back to the original question, and this time he felt compelled to give the only honest answer he possessed to this question, an answer that appalled even himself as he spoke it. Well, he said, in the smallest voice he possessed, I guess what I'd like most is getting my picture in the paper with the word president under it. You gotta love the honesty, right? Now, he was sitting with seasoned Quakers, and they know how to hold silent space. So even though it's a funny answer, they knew this was important, and they actually didn't laugh in his telling of the story. They went into a long and serious silence, a silence in which Palmer writes, I could only sweat and inwardly groan. Finally, the questioner broke the silence with a question that did crack everyone up. Parker, he said, can you think of an easier way to get your picture in the paper? Of course, it was obvious by then, even to himself, that his desire to be president had much more to do with his ego than with a real calling. And so he withdrew his name from consideration and went on to be an incredible educator and activist nationwide, by the way. Had he taken that job, he writes, it would have been very bad for him and a disaster for the school. So here in his language, a quote, if we accept the notion that our lives are dependent on an inexhaustible cycle of seasons, on a play of powers that we can conspire with but never control, we run headlong into a culture that insists against all evidence that we can make whatever kind of life we want, whenever we want it. Deeper still, we run headlong into our own egos, which want desperately to believe that we are always in charge. We need to challenge and reform these distortions of culture and ego, reform them toward ways of thinking and doing and being that are rooted in respect for the living ecology of life. Unlike raw material on which we make all our demands, this ecology demands on us, even as it sustains our lives. We are here not only to transform the world, but also to be transformed. End quote. If we accept the notion that our lives are dependent on this earth, her seasons and cycles, and that we are here not only to transform the world, but also to be transformed, I think this can help us into a worldview that does not see humans at the center of it. It can help us to see that we are part of a greater whole, that our egos are not the center of life, nor should they be. And what of the metaphor of the seasons? Here are some suggestions from Parker Palmer I'd like to hold up to spark your creativity. Autumn's movement into winter can teach us that if we fear the dark, if we resist it, it only grows more terrifying. But if instead we allow the paradox of darkness and lightness to be, the two will conspire to bring wholeness and health to every living thing. Autumn reminds us of the importance of the small daily dyings that are necessary to new life. If we try to make a life that defies the diminishments of autumn, the life will be artificial at best and utterly colorless as well. But when we yield to the endless interplay of living and dying, dying and living, the life we are given will be real and colorful, fruitful and whole. It's a beautiful thought, I think. What about spring? Nature's great giveaway. The paradox known in all the wisdom traditions. If you receive a gift, you keep it alive not by clinging to it, but by passing it along. If we want to save our lives, we cannot cling to them, but must spend them with abandon. And when we obsess about bottom lines and productivity, we may be paradoxically preventing our work from ever bearing fruit. Unlikely that we will ever know the fullness of spring in our lives. Finally, what of summer that we are in now, with gardens full of zucchini, meadows with wildflowers and grasses and trees full of fruit? Summer offers us an antidote to viewing the world from a model of scarcity of time, resources, and money. In the human world, abundance does not happen automatically. It is created when we have the sense to choose community, to come together to celebrate and to share our common store. So whether the scarcity is resources or money or love or power or words, the true law of life is that we generate more of whatever seems scarce by trusting its supply and passing it around. The summertime truth is that abundance is a communal act, the joint creation of an incredibly complex ecology in which each part functions on behalf of the whole, and in return is sustained by the whole. Community doesn't just create abundance, community is abundance. If we could learn that equation from the world of nature, the human world might be transformed. For ourselves and for the planet, let us endeavor to clarify and reorient our relationship with the earth and with the world around us. To recognize through our actions, our deeds, what we know is true intellectually. We are not at the center of this world, as much as we forget it. Let us remember that our place on this earth is a humble place, part of a greater whole, and that we must serve that whole if we are to prosper as individuals and as a planet. Let us continue to reorient ourselves and resist the influence of culture. Reorient ourselves towards serving this larger whole within the movement and flow of the seasons of nature and the natural cycles of this planet, the natural cycles of our lives. Amen, and blessed be. We have a beloved summer ritual that we will begin now. We'll be invited up to the altar here to take a pebble or an object found from the sea, such as the sea glass, and place it into the water on the left of the altar there with an intention for healing and wholeness. If you find it helpful, I invite you to bring in any thoughts from the reflection or what ways nature and the metaphor of the seasons might resonate with the healing and intentions that you have. So I'm going to offer some flute music, and as I begin, I invite you to come up one at a time.